The raging waters churned violently against Temperance Owens' skin as she clung desperately to a floating piece of timber, her golden brown hair plastered to her face, and her lungs burning with each labored breath. The flash flood had come without warning, sweeping through her small homestead on the outskirts of Helena, Montana territory with such ferocity that she'd barely had time to escape with her life, much less salvage any of her belongings. The year was 1878, and in a matter of minutes, everything Temperance had worked so hard to build over the past 2 years since her parents' passing had been reduced to nothing more than debris in the raging current of the Missouri River. "Help!" she screamed, though her voice was lost in the roar of the floodwaters. The timber she clung to spun wildly, threatening to pull her under with each rotation. Her soaked dress weighed her down like an anchor, and her strength was failing rapidly. The spring melt had come early that year, and the heavy rains of the past week had finally caused the river to break its banks with devastating consequences. Just as her fingers began to slip from the slick wood, Temperance felt something solid grasp her arm. Through water-blurred vision, she made out the silhouette of a man on horseback, who had ridden his mount dangerously close to the raging waters. "Hold on, miss," the man shouted, his voice deep and determined as he pulled her toward him with surprising strength. Temperance felt herself being lifted from the churning waters and draped across the saddle of a chestnut mare. Her rescuer quickly guided the horse back toward higher ground, away from the devastating flood that continued to rage behind them. As they reached safety, Temperance collapsed against the stranger, her body trembling from cold and exhaustion. "You're safe now," the man assured her, his voice softer now as he dismounted and gently helped her down from the horse. "Name's Dawson O'Malley. You got family nearby." Temperance looked back toward the flood that had consumed her small homestead and shook her head, tears mixing with the river water on her cheeks. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "The river, it took everything." Dawson nodded solemnly, his eyes a striking blue that reminded Temperance of the Montana sky on a clear summer day filled with understanding and concern. "Let's get you somewhere warm before you catch your death," he said, removing his coat and draping it over her shoulders. As he helped her onto his horse once more, Temperance couldn't help but notice the quiet strength in his hands and the gentle way he ensured she was secure before mounting behind her. Despite her exhaustion and loss, she felt oddly safe in the presence of this stranger who had risked his own life to save hers. Dawson guided his mare toward a small ranch nestled in the foothills about a mile from the river. The modest homestead consisted of a sturdy log cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, a barn, corral, and a few outbuildings. As they approached, an older woman emerged from the cabin, her expression changing from curiosity to concern at the sight of the bedraggled pair. "Dawson." "What in heaven's name?" the woman called out, rushing toward them as Dawson helped Temperance dismount. "Found her in the river, Ma. Flood must have taken her place," Dawson explained, supporting Temperance's weight as her legs threatened to give way beneath her. "You poor dear," Dawson's mother said, immediately taking charge. "Come inside. We need to get you warm and dry." The next hour passed in a blur for Temperance. Mrs. O'Malley Martha, as she insisted on being called, provided her with dry clothes, a warm blanket, and a cup of strong, sweet tea laced with a touch of whiskey for medicinal purposes. Seated by the fire in the cabin's main room, Temperance finally began to process what had happened. "I was tending to my garden when I heard it," she explained quietly, staring into the flames. "A sound like thunder, but different. By the time I realized what was happening, the water was already at my door. I barely made it out, everything I had." Her voice broke as tears threatened once more. "You're alive," That's what matters, Dawson said firmly from where he stood by the window, watching as the rain continued to fall. Things can be replaced, lives can't. Temperance met his gaze and nodded slowly. At 22, she had already endured more loss than many faced in a lifetime. Her parents had succumbed to influenza 2 years prior, leaving her the small homestead she had been determined to maintain on her own, despite the challenges faced by a single woman in the still wild Montana territory. Now, even that was gone. Do you have any family elsewhere? Anyone you can send word to? Martha asked gently. Temperance shook her head. No. My parents were all I had. We came west from Boston 5 years ago. They're buried on what was our land. The realization that even their graves might have been washed away struck her suddenly, bringing fresh grief. Martha and Dawson exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Well then, Martha decided, you'll stay with us until you get back on your feet. We've got the room and I wouldn't mind some female company for a change. I couldn't impose, Temperance began, but Dawson cut her off. It's not an imposition. It's what neighbors do, he said simply. Besides, Helena's a growing town, but it's still small enough that folks look after one another. You'd do the same if our positions were reversed. Temperance wanted to argue that they weren't neighbors, that they were strangers who owed her nothing, but exhaustion won out over pride. Thank you, she whispered instead. That night, lying in a borrowed nightgown in the O'Malley's spare room, Temperance stared at the unfamiliar ceiling and tried to make sense of how drastically her life had changed in a single day. She had lost everything: her home, her parents' belongings, every memento and practical item she possessed, yet somehow she had found herself under the protection of strangers whose kindness seemed boundless. As sleep finally claimed her, her last conscious thought was of Dawson O'Malley's steady blue eyes and the way he had reached for her without hesitation, pulling her from the water when all hope seemed lost. Morning brought clarity and with it, a renewed sense of determination. Temperance rose early, borrowed dress smoothed as best she could, and made her way to the kitchen where she found Martha already preparing breakfast. I insist on helping, Temperance said by way of greeting. I may have lost my possessions, but I haven't lost my ability to work. Martha smiled warmly. I had a feeling you'd say something like that. There's coffee on the stove, and if you wouldn't mind kneading that dough over there, I'd be grateful. Dawson's already out with the cattle, but he'll be back for breakfast soon enough. As Temperance worked the dough with practiced hands, Martha told her more about their ranch. The O'Malleys had come to Montana 10 years earlier, when the territory was even more untamed than it was now. Dawson's father had died 3 years ago in a riding accident, leaving Martha and Dawson to run the small ranch themselves. We do all right, Martha said. Nothing fancy, but we get by. Dawson's good with the cattle and I keep a decent garden. We sell beef to the butcher in Helena and sometimes to the army at Fort Harrison. It seems like a good life, Temperance observed. Martha nodded. It is. Lonely sometimes, especially for Dawson. A man needs his own family eventually, but he's been too busy taking care of me and this place to court properly. She gave Temperance a sideways glance. What about you? Was there a young man in your life before the flood? Temperance shook her head. No. After my parents died, keeping the homestead running took all my time. Besides, men looking for wives tend to want someone more. She hesitated. Conventional than me. Conventional, Martha raised an eyebrow. I read too much. Have opinions on things women aren't supposed to have opinions about. My father educated me like a son as well as a daughter. Temperance smiled sadly. He always said knowledge was the greatest inheritance he could give me. Martha laughed. Sounds like you and my son might have some interesting conversations then. Dawson's always got his nose in some book or newspaper when he's not working. His father thought it was a waste of time, but I always figured learning never hurt anyone. Before Temperance could respond, the door opened and Dawson himself entered, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and horses. He stopped short at the sight of Temperance kneading dough in his kitchen, looking far more composed than she had the previous evening. "Miss Owens," he said, removing his hat. "You're looking better this morning. Please call me Temperance," she replied. "And yes, a night's sleep has done wonders. I can't thank you enough for your rescue yesterday." A slight flush colored Dawson's tan cheeks. "Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did," Temperance said firmly, meeting his eyes. "And I won't forget it." Breakfast passed pleasantly, with conversation flowing more easily than Temperance might have expected among virtual strangers. Dawson, she discovered, was not only well-read but possessed a quick wit and thoughtful nature that made him easy to talk to. At 28, he had the confidence of a man who knew his own mind but none of the arrogance she had encountered in other men of similar age. After the meal, Dawson announced his intention to ride into Helena. "I need to let Sheriff Callahan know about the flood damage. There might be others who need help." He hesitated, then added, "Would you like to come along, Temperance? You'll need to report your losses anyway, and perhaps we could see about getting you some proper clothes and necessities." "I have no money," Temperance said quietly. "Everything was in my home." "The general store keeps accounts," Dawson assured her. "Tom Barton's a fair man. He'll extend credit when it's needed, especially in circumstances like these." Martha nodded encouragingly. "Go on, dear. It'll do you good to get into town, and Dawson can introduce you to some folks. Helena's a good community." An hour later, Temperance found herself riding alongside Dawson on a borrowed mare, heading toward Helena. The morning was clear, with no sign of the previous day's tempest save for the muddy ground and debris scattered along their path. As they crested a hill, Dawson pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley below. "Helena," he said. "Started as a gold mining camp they called Last Chance Gulch back in '64. Now it's the biggest city in the territory, though that's not saying much compared to places back east." Temperance studied the town with interest. Though not as large or imposing as Boston, Helena had a bustling energy that was unmistakable even from a distance. The main street was lined with substantial buildings, some of brick and stone rather than just wood, and people moved purposefully along the boardwalks that fronted various businesses. As they rode into town, Temperance became acutely aware of curious glances cast their way. A woman riding beside a man who wasn't her husband or relative was bound to raise eyebrows, even in a relatively progressive frontier town. Their first stop was the sheriff's office, a sturdy building near the center of town. Sheriff Callahan, a grizzled man in his 50s with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing, listened gravely to Dawson's account of the flood and Temperance's rescue. "Damn shame," he said when Dawson finished. "We've had reports of similar flooding upriver. Spring melt came fast this year, and with all that rain." He shook his head. "Miss Owens, I'll make a formal record of your loss. Not that it brings anything back, but it might help if the territorial government offers any assistance." "Thank you, Sheriff," Temperance said. "I'd also like to inquire about any available work in town. I need to start rebuilding my life." The sheriff considered her for a moment. "Mrs. Sullivan at the boarding house might need help. Her last girl left to get married last month. And the school's always looking for someone who can read and write well enough to teach the younger children." Hope flickered in Temperance's chest. She had assisted with teaching back in Boston before her family moved west. "I'd be very interested in speaking with the school board." "I'll introduce you to Reverend Parker then," Dawson offered. "He heads the school committee." Their next stop was the general store, where Dawson made good on his promise to introduce Temperance to Tom Barton. The storekeeper, a portly man with kind eyes and a bushy mustache, listened sympathetically to Temperance's plight. "Terrible business, these floods," he said. "Lost my brother to one back in '69. Tell you what, Miss Owens, you take what you need within reason, of course, and pay when you can. Dawson here can vouch for you, and that's good enough for me." Overwhelmed by such generosity, Temperance selected only the bare necessities: 2 simple dresses, undergarments, a pair of sturdy boots, and basic toiletries. Even so, the bill came to more than she was comfortable owing, but Mr. Barton waved away her concerns. "Life on the frontier's hard enough without worrying over a few dollars worth of necessities," he said firmly. "You just focus on getting back on your feet." As they left the store, parcels in hand, Dawson suggested they visit the church to speak with Reverend Parker about possible teaching positions. The small white church sat on a gentle rise at the edge of town, its steeple a beacon against the blue Montana sky. They found the Reverend in his study, a scholarly-looking man whose face lit up at the mention of a potential teacher. "Providence," he exclaimed after hearing Temperance's story. "We've been praying for someone with teaching experience. Our last schoolmistress left to join her husband in Bozeman, and we've been making do with volunteers. How soon could you start?" Temperance blinked, surprised by the swift offer. Immediately, I suppose. Though I have no materials, no books, the school has what you need," Reverend Parker assured her. "The position includes a small room attached to the schoolhouse and meals with various families in the community, plus a modest salary." "It's not much, but it sounds perfect," Temperance interrupted, unable to contain her relief. "Truly, Reverend, this is more than I dared hope for." After finalizing details with the Reverend, including plans for Temperance to begin the following Monday, she and Dawson continued their tour of Helena. He showed her the school where she would be teaching, introduced her to several townspeople including Mrs. Sullivan at the boarding house, who indeed needed help, and offered Temperance additional work on weekends, and finally suggested they take lunch at the town's small cafe. Over simple fare of beef stew and fresh bread, Temperance found herself studying Dawson more closely. There was something compelling about the quiet cowboy who had saved her life. His hands, though calloused from ranch work, moved with a certain grace, and when he spoke of books or current events, his eyes lit with intelligence and passion. "You've been very kind," she said as they finished their meal. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you and your mother." Dawson shook his head. "There's no debt between us. As I said, it's what neighbors do." He hesitated, then added, "Though I admit, I'm sorry you'll be moving into town once you start teaching. Ma's enjoyed having another woman about the place." "I've enjoyed it too," Temperance admitted. "Your mother is wonderful company. But I can't impose forever, and the teaching position is a blessing I can't pass up." "Of course," Dawson agreed quickly. "And Helena's not far. Perhaps you could ride out to the ranch some Sundays for dinner. Ma would like that, and so would I." The sincere invitation warmed Temperance more than she expected. "I'd like that very much." The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Martha helped Temperance alter her new dresses for a better fit, while Dawson repaired a trunk he found in the attic for her to use. By Sunday evening, Temperance was ready to begin her new life as Helena's schoolteacher, though the prospect of leaving the O'Malley ranch filled her with unexpected melancholy. "You've made this feel like home in just a few days," she told Martha as they washed dishes after supper. "I can't thank you enough." Martha patted her hand. "You're welcome here any time, dear, and I expect you for Sunday dinners whenever you can make it." She glanced toward the main room where Dawson sat reading by the fire. "My son's been different since you arrived, more talkative, happier." Temperance felt her cheeks warm. "He's been very kind. Kindness has nothing to do with the way he looks at you when you're not watching," Martha said with a knowing smile. "But don't worry, I won't embarrass either of you by saying more." The next morning, Dawson drove Temperance to town in the wagon, her few possessions secured in the back. The schoolhouse, a simple one-room building painted white with a small bell tower, stood at the edge of town. Attached to one side was a modest room that would serve as Temperance's living quarters. "It's not much," Dawson observed as he carried her trunk inside. The room contained a narrow bed, a small table with a chair, a chest of drawers, and a pot-bellied stove for heat. A single window looked out toward the distant mountains. "It's perfect," Temperance assured him, though after the warmth of the O'Malley home, the room felt stark and empty. "I'll make it cozy in no time." Dawson lingered, hat in hand, clearly reluctant to leave. "If you need anything, I'll send word," she promised, "and I'll see you Sunday for dinner." His smile brightened his entire face. "I'll come fetch you myself." As he turned to go, Temperance impulsively caught his arm. "Dawson, I don't think I've properly thanked you. Not just for saving me from the river, but for everything since. You gave me hope when I had none." For a moment, something intense flickered in his eyes, and Temperance thought he might say something more. Instead, he gently squeezed her hand. "You're stronger than you know, Temperance Owens. That hope was always inside you. I just helped you find it again." With that, he departed, leaving Temperance to prepare for her first day of teaching. As she arranged her few belongings and reviewed the school materials, she couldn't help but reflect on how drastically her life had changed in just a few days. She had lost everything she owned to the raging Missouri River, yet somehow she didn't feel impoverished. Instead, she felt as if she stood on the threshold of something new and potentially wonderful. The next morning, Temperance rang the school bell precisely at 8 o'clock, her heart pounding with anticipation as children of various ages made their way into the schoolhouse. By the end of that first day, she knew she had found her calling. Despite the challenges of teaching multiple grade levels simultaneously, the children's enthusiasm and eagerness to learn filled her with satisfaction. Days turned into weeks, and Temperance settled into a routine. Weekdays were devoted to teaching, with evenings spent preparing lessons and reading by lamplight in her small room. Saturdays, she helped Mrs. Sullivan at the boarding house, earning extra money by cleaning rooms and assisting with laundry. And Sundays were for the O'Malleys. True to his word, Dawson came to town each Sunday morning to bring her to the ranch for dinner. Those journeys, just the two of them in his wagon or on horseback when the weather permitted, became the highlight of Temperance's week. They talked of books, shared stories from their childhoods, discussed the news from the territorial capital, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, grew closer with each passing mile. Martha always welcomed Temperance with open arms, treating her like the daughter she'd never had. After dinner, they would often sit on the porch if the weather was fine, or by the fire if it wasn't, simply enjoying each other's company. These moments of domestic tranquility healed something in Temperance that had been broken long before the flood swept away her possessions. As spring gave way to summer, Temperance found herself thinking of Dawson with increasing frequency. His quiet strength, his thoughtful nature, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, these details occupied her mind during quiet moments at school or in her room at night. Yet she hesitated to acknowledge these feelings, even to herself. After losing everything once, the thought of risking her heart seemed terrifying. One Sunday in late July, Dawson arrived in town earlier than usual, a mysterious smile playing at his lips. "I thought we might take a different route to the ranch today," he suggested as he helped her into the wagon. "If you're amenable, curious," Temperance nodded. "Lead on, Mr. O'Malley." Instead of heading directly out of town, Dawson guided the horses along a less familiar path that eventually brought them to the banks of the Missouri River, though far upstream from where Temperance's homestead had stood. Here, the river flowed peacefully, its waters clear and inviting in the summer heat. "I thought it might be good for you to see the river when it's not trying to kill you," Dawson explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "It's not always a destroyer. Sometimes it's quite beautiful." Temperance approached the water's edge cautiously, memories of that terrifying day still fresh despite the months that had passed. But Dawson was right, the river bore little resemblance to the raging torrent that had swept away her home. Today it sparkled in the sunlight, fish occasionally breaking the surface as they caught insects, birds singing in the trees that lined the banks. "It is beautiful," she admitted, allowing herself to relax. Dawson produced a blanket from the wagon and spread it on a grassy spot beneath a cottonwood tree. From a basket, he withdrew bread, cheese, cold chicken, and a bottle of cider. "I thought we might have a picnic before heading to the ranch," he said, suddenly looking uncertain. "Ma knows not to expect us until later." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Temperance settled onto the blanket. "This is lovely, Dawson. Thank you." They ate in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the peaceful surroundings and the simple pleasure of good food. When they had finished, Dawson leaned back against the tree trunk, his expression turning serious. "There's something I've been wanting to talk to you about," he began. "These past few months, having you come to the ranch each Sunday, getting to know you better. It's been the happiest time of my life." Temperance's heart began to race. "It's been wonderful for me too," she said softly. Dawson reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Temperance, I know we met under unusual circumstances, and I don't want to rush you, especially after everything you've been through. But I find myself thinking about you all the time. When you're not at the ranch, it feels empty somehow." "Dawson," Temperance whispered, her voice catching. "I'm not asking for any declarations," he hurried to add. "I just wanted you to know how I feel, and to ask if perhaps you might consider. That is, if you might feel something similar." In that moment, looking into his earnest blue eyes, Temperance knew that the fear of losing her heart was nothing compared to the fear of never giving it a chance to love. She had lost everything once and survived. Surely she was strong enough to risk her heart now. "I do," she said simply. "Feel something similar, that is. More than similar, if I'm being honest." The smile that lit Dawson's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward until his lips met hers in a gentle kiss that spoke of promise and possibilities. When they finally arrived at the ranch, hand in hand and perhaps a bit flushed, Martha took one look at them and broke into a knowing smile. "Well," she said, wiping her hands on her apron, "it's about time." Summer passed in a golden haze of contentment for Temperance. Weekdays were still devoted to her teaching, but now her evenings often included Dawson, who would ride into town several times a week to take her for walks or to sit with her on the schoolhouse steps, talking until the stars came out. Sundays remained sacred time at the ranch with Dawson and Martha, who had become the family Temperance thought she'd lost forever. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the start of a new school term, Dawson began to act strangely. He seemed distracted during their conversations, and twice he canceled their evening walks with vague excuses about ranch business. Temperance tried not to worry, but old insecurities resurfaced despite her best efforts. Has Dawson said anything to you?" She finally asked Martha one Sunday while they prepared dinner together. "He seems distant lately." Martha looked surprised. "Distant? That boy's been working himself to exhaustion trying to get everything done before winter sets in. But no, he hasn't mentioned any troubles with you." "Quite the opposite, he talks about you constantly." Somewhat reassured, Temperance let the matter drop, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Her answer came the following Wednesday evening. Dawson arrived at the schoolhouse just as she was finishing her preparations for the next day's lessons, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "I was hoping you might come for a ride with me," he said, fidgeting with his hat. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curious despite her concerns, Temperance agreed. To her surprise, Dawson led them out of town along a familiar route, the path toward her former homestead, which she hadn't visited since the flood. As they drew closer to where her cabin had once stood, Temperance felt a pang of sadness, but it was duller now, tempered by the happiness she'd found in her new life. "Dawson, why are we—" she began, then stopped abruptly as they rounded a bend in the road. Where her ruined homestead should have been stood a new cabin smaller than her original home, but solid and welcoming with a front porch and smoke rising from the chimney. A split-rail fence enclosed a yard where chickens pecked contentedly, and a small barn stood nearby. The devastation wrought by the flood had been erased, replaced by this sturdy new beginning. "What is this?" she whispered, turning to Dawson in confusion. He helped her down from her horse, his expression a mixture of nervousness and hope. "It's yours, or it could be, if you want it." "I don't understand. After the flood, the land was abandoned. No one claimed it, so I filed papers in town. Been working on rebuilding whenever I could get away. That's why I had to cancel our walks a couple of times." He took a deep breath. "Temperance, I know how much your independence means to you. I know you've built a good life in town as the school teacher, but I hoped, you might want a piece of your old life back too." Tears welled in Temperance's eyes as she took in the cabin and the surrounding land, her land, rebuilt through Dawson's labor. "You did all this. For me?" "I did," he said softly. "But there's more." Taking her hand, he led her toward the cabin door. "Before you decide anything, I want you to see inside." The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a small bedroom visible through an open door, and handmade furniture that spoke of careful craftsmanship. A fire burned cheerfully in the stone hearth, and on the mantel above it sat two framed photographs, one of Temperance with her parents, the other of Temperance herself. "How?" she gasped, reaching for the photograph of her family that she had thought lost forever. "Sheriff Callahan found it downriver, caught in some branches. The frame was ruined, but the photograph survived. I had it reframed in Helena." Dawson hesitated. "The other one I commissioned from the photographer in town. Had him take it when you were teaching one day. You looked so happy, so in your element, I wanted to capture that." Overwhelmed, Temperance turned to face him. "Dawson, I don't know what to say. It's too much." "It's not enough," he countered, suddenly dropping to one knee and taking both her hands in his. "Temperance Owens, when I pulled you from that river, I had no idea you'd end up saving me right back. My life was fine before I met you, but now it's extraordinary, full of light and laughter and purpose beyond just working the ranch. I love you. I want to build a life with you here, at the ranch, in town, wherever you want to be. Will you marry me?" Time seemed to suspend as Temperance looked down at this man who had given her so much more than just a physical rescue from the river. He had given her hope, yes, but also love, respect, and now a future she could scarcely have imagined in those dark moments when the floodwaters threatened to claim her life. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. Yes, Dawson O'Malley, I will marry you." Joy broke across his face like dawn as he rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of happiness. When they finally parted, both breathless and beaming, Dawson rested his forehead against hers. "There's one more thing," he said. "I didn't just rebuild the cabin. I made some improvements." He led her back outside and around to the rear of the cabin, where a fenced garden plot awaited spring planting. Beyond it, on a small rise, stood 2 wooden crosses, freshly made and carefully placed. "Your parents' graves," Dawson explained softly. "I found the markers downstream, broken but still legible. I made new ones and placed them where I thought they might have been, based on what you told me about your homestead layout. If it's not right, we can move them." Temperance couldn't speak through her tears. This final act of thoughtfulness honoring the family she had lost, while helping her build a new one, touched her more deeply than she could express. Instead, she wrapped her arms around Dawson and held him tightly, hoping he could feel what words failed to convey. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Helena, with Martha beaming proudly in the front pew and what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Reverend Parker officiated, speaking eloquently about how love could emerge from tragedy, how hope could rise from the depths of despair, much like Temperance herself had risen from the floodwaters with Dawson's help. After the ceremony, the newlyweds rode to their new home, the rebuilt homestead that represented both Temperance's past and her future with Dawson. They had decided that she would continue teaching through the end of the term, riding to and from town each day, while Dawson would split his time between the ranch with Martha and their new home. Eventually, they planned to build a larger house at the ranch where they could all live together. But for now, this compromise allowed Temperance to honor her commitment to her students while beginning her new life as Mrs. O'Malley. That evening, as they sat on their front porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Dawson took Temperance's hand. "Happy?" he asked simply. She squeezed his hand, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "The river took everything I owned, but it led me to you. I think that was a fair trade." Dawson laughed softly. "I got the better end of that bargain, Mrs. O'Malley." "I disagree, Mr. O'Malley," she countered with a smile. "But I suppose we have a lifetime to debate the point." A lifetime, Temperance thought as Dawson pulled her close. From destruction had come creation. From loss had come love. The river that had swept away everything she owned had, in its own way, given her everything she needed. Life settled into a new rhythm for Temperance and Dawson. Mornings began early, with Temperance preparing for her teaching day while Dawson tended to chores around their homestead before riding out to the ranch. Evenings were spent together, sharing the day's events over dinner, reading by the fire, or simply enjoying each other's company. Weekends often found them at the main ranch, helping Martha and spending time as a family. As winter approached, Temperance completed her term at the school. With the arrival of heavy snow, travel to and from town became difficult, and she made the decision to take a break from teaching until spring. This unexpected gift of time allowed her to fully settle into her role as Dawson's wife and to learn more about ranching from both him and Martha. "You're a natural with the animals," Martha observed one crisp December morning as Temperance helped feed the chickens at the main ranch. "Dawson said you've even got that ornery milk cow of yours giving twice what she used to." Temperance laughed. "Bessie just needed a firm hand and some extra attention. Animals aren't so different from children in that regard." Martha's expression turned thoughtful. "Speaking of children, have you and Dawson discussed starting a family?" The question caught Temperance off guard, though it wasn't unwelcome. "We've talked about it in general terms. We both want children, but we agreed to give ourselves some time to just be married first." She hesitated, then added softly, "Though lately, I've been thinking it might be nice to have a baby next winter." "Well, don't wait too long," Martha advised with a knowing smile. "Some of the best parts of life come as surprises." That evening, as snow fell gently outside the windows of their snug cabin, Temperance broached the subject with Dawson. "Your mother was asking about grandchildren today," she said as they sat before the fire, her mending in her lap, a book in his hands. Dawson set his book aside, his expression carefully neutral. "Was she? That sounds like Ma, always planning ahead." "It made me think," Temperance continued, setting aside her mending as well. "Perhaps we shouldn't wait as long as we initially thought. Life is unpredictable, as we both know all too well." "Are you saying you want to try for a baby?" Dawson asked, a hint of excitement creeping into his voice despite his attempt at casualness. Temperance nodded, suddenly shy despite the months they'd been married. "I think I am. That is, if you feel ready." The smile that spread across Dawson's face was answer enough, but his words confirmed it. "I've been ready since the day I married you," he admitted, moving to kneel before her chair and take her hands in his. "I just didn't want to rush you." "Always so considerate," she teased, leaning forward to kiss him. "It's one of the many reasons I love you." Their first winter as husband and wife passed in contented isolation, with occasional trips to town for supplies and frequent visits to the main ranch. As the snow melted and spring transformed the landscape, Temperance discovered that their winter conversations about starting a family had borne fruit. She was expecting their first child, due in late autumn. The news was met with jubilation, particularly from Martha, who immediately began knitting tiny garments and offering advice based on her experience raising Dawson. The expectant father himself vacillated between overwhelming joy and nervous concern, especially as Temperance's body changed to accommodate their growing child. "Are you sure you should be doing that?" became his most frequent question as Temperance continued her normal activities, from gardening to helping with light ranch chores during their time at the main property. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she would remind him gently. "Women have been having babies while working the land since time immemorial." Nevertheless, as summer progressed and her condition became more pronounced, Temperance did find herself slowing down. The heat of Montana's summer seemed more oppressive than in previous years, and she was grateful for the cool interior of their cabin and for Dawson's insistence that she rest during the hottest part of the day. In August, when Temperance was 6 months along, a letter arrived that changed their plans once again. The school board, desperate for a teacher for the fall term, asked if Temperance would consider returning. The previous replacement had departed suddenly, leaving Helena's children without an instructor just weeks before school was to resume. "You can't possibly teach in your condition," Dawson objected when Temperance showed him the letter. "It's too much strain, especially with the baby due in November." "Other women work right up until their time," Temperance pointed out, "and the board has offered to provide an assistant who can take over when the baby comes." "But the travel each day, we could stay in town during the week," Temperance suggested. "The school still keeps that room for the teacher. It would be cramped but manageable for a few months. We'd come to the homestead and the ranch on weekends." Dawson frowned, clearly torn between supporting his wife's desire to help and his concern for her well-being. "What about after the baby arrives? You'd have an infant to care for while teaching." "The assistant would become the primary teacher then, and I could help as I'm able. Or perhaps I could take a longer break. We'll figure it out." She placed a hand on her rounded belly. This child will grow up knowing that both of his parents contribute to their community in meaningful ways. That's important to me." In the end, they compromised. Temperance would teach until the end of October, giving the school board time to find a permanent replacement before the baby arrived. They would stay in town Monday through Friday, with Martha joining them in town as the due date approached to help prepare for the birth. Despite Dawson's continued concern, the arrangement worked well. Temperance found that teaching kept her mind engaged during the final months of pregnancy, when physical discomfort might otherwise have dominated her thoughts. The children were excited about Miss Owens' baby. Many still used her maiden name out of habit, and several of the older girls stayed after school to help prepare the teachers' quarters for the infant's arrival. As October drew to a close, Temperance taught her final day of classes before her maternity leave. The children presented her with handmade gifts for the baby: tiny knitted booties, a carved wooden rattle, a soft blanket pieced together from scraps of fabric. "We'll miss you, Mrs. O'Malley," said Emma Johnson, a bright 10-year-old who had been one of Temperance's first students. "But we're excited to meet your baby when you bring him or her to visit." "I'll miss all of you too," Temperance assured them, touched by their thoughtfulness. "And I promise to bring the baby for a visit as soon as we're both able to travel." That evening, as Dawson helped Temperance pack their belongings for the move back to the homestead, she felt the first stirrings of what she thought were just the baby's particularly vigorous movements. By midnight, however, it became clear that these were not mere kicks, but the early signs of labor a full 2 weeks before her expected due date. "It's too soon," Dawson said, his face pale with worry as he helped Temperance to the bed. "I'll fetch the midwife and send word to Ma." "Hurry," Temperance urged, gritting her teeth against another contraction. "This baby seems impatient to meet us." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and effort for Temperance. The midwife arrived quickly, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Dawson's barely concealed panic. Martha appeared not long after, immediately taking charge of the situation with quiet efficiency, sending Dawson for hot water and clean linens while she held Temperance's hand through each contraction. "You're doing beautifully," Martha assured her. "First babies often come early. It's nothing to worry about." Despite this reassurance, the labor was long and difficult. Dawn broke over Helena with Temperance still struggling to bring her child into the world, her strength flagging but her determination undiminished. "One more push," the midwife encouraged as the sun's first rays filtered through the small window. "I can see the head now." Gathering her remaining energy, Temperance bore down with all her might, feeling the extraordinary sensation of her child leaving her body at last. A moment of silence followed, then a robust cry filled the room, the sound of new life announcing its arrival. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Temperance's chest. "And a fine, healthy one at that." Tears streamed down Temperance's face as she gazed at her son for the first time. Despite his early arrival, he seemed perfect, tiny but complete, with a dusting of dark hair that promised to match his father's and lungs that left no doubt as to his vitality. Dawson, who had been allowed back into the room for the birth itself, stood beside the bed in awe, his own cheeks wet with tears. "He's magnificent," he whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand, "just like his mother." They named him Thomas James O'Malley Thomas after Temperance's father, and James after Dawson's. Though small, young Thomas thrived under the attentive care of his parents and grandmother. By the time November's first snowfall arrived, he had gained enough weight that even the midwife declared him caught up to where he should be. With winter setting in once more, the young family settled into life at their homestead. Temperance discovered that motherhood, while exhausting, brought a joy she had never known before. Watching Thomas grow and change daily, seeing Dawson's tender care as he walked the floor with a fussy infant or changed nappies without complaint, deepened her love for both her son and her husband in ways she hadn't anticipated. Martha divided her time between the main ranch and the younger O'Malley's homestead, providing invaluable help and enjoying her role as grandmother. "This is what I was meant for," she declared one evening as she rocked Thomas to sleep while Temperance prepared dinner. "Watching my son with his son, there's no greater blessing." As Thomas grew from newborn to infant to toddler, life settled into new patterns for the O'Malley family. Temperance returned to teaching part-time when Thomas was 6 months old, bringing him with her to school 2 days a week while Martha or Dawson cared for him the other days. The arrangement allowed Temperance to maintain her connection to the community and her love of education, while still prioritizing her family. By the time Thomas celebrated his 2nd birthday, the family had made a significant change. They had built the addition to the main ranch house that they had long discussed, creating a spacious home where all 3 generations could live together while maintaining appropriate privacy. This arrangement allowed Dawson to focus fully on expanding their cattle operation, while Temperance continued her part-time teaching, and Martha enjoyed her grandson's daily company. It was shortly after this move that Temperance discovered she was expecting their 2nd child. Thomas, now a chatty and energetic toddler, seemed fascinated by the concept of a new baby, frequently patting his mother's growing belly and asking when his brother or sister would come out to play. "Soon enough," Temperance would tell him, marveling at how different this pregnancy felt from her first, not just physically, but emotionally. Where there had been anxiety and uncertainty with Thomas, now there was confidence and joyful anticipation. Their daughter, Margaret Martha O'Malley, arrived in the spring of 1883, right on schedule this time, and with considerably less drama than her brother's birth. With her mother's golden brown hair and her father's blue eyes, little Margaret, called Maggie by everyone except her formal grandmother, completed their family in ways they hadn't realized needed completing. "2 children under 3, Dawson remarked one evening as they watched Thomas clumsily attempt to help his infant sister by patting her back while she lay on a blanket. "Did you ever imagine this would be your life when I pulled you from the river 5 years ago?" Temperance leaned against her husband's shoulder, contentment washing over her as she surveyed the domestic scene before them. "Never in my wildest dreams," she admitted. "I was just hoping to survive another day." "And now?" Dawson asked, his arm tightening around her waist. "Now I'm not just surviving, I'm living fully and completely." She turned to face him, the love she felt reflected in his eyes. "You didn't just save my life that day, Dawson O'Malley. You gave me a new one better than I could have imagined." He kissed her then, gentle and familiar yet still capable of sending a thrill through her after all their years together. "The river may have swept away everything you owned," he murmured against her lips, "but it brought you to me. I'd say we both came out ahead in that bargain." As evening settled over the Montana landscape, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold, the O'Malley family gathered on the ranch house porch. Martha rocked little Maggie while Thomas chased fireflies in the yard, his delighted giggles carrying on the warm summer air. Dawson and Temperance sat side by side in matching chairs, their hands intertwined as they watched their children. From devastation had come renewal, from loss had come abundant gain. The river that had once threatened to take Temperance's life had instead led her to love, to family, to a happiness deeper and more enduring than she had ever dared to hope for. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, She offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the flood that had washed away her possessions, but carried her straight into the arms of the man who had become her everything. Years passed, seasons changing with the rhythmic certainty of nature. The O'Malley Ranch prospered under Dawson's careful management, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the Helena area. Thomas and Maggie were joined by a third sibling, Samuel, born when Maggie was 4 and Thomas 7. The 3 O'Malley children grew up surrounded by love, learning the values of hard work, education, and compassion from parents who exemplified these qualities daily. Temperance continued teaching part-time until all her children were in school, then returned to full-time education, eventually becoming the head teacher at Helena's growing school. Her innovative teaching methods and unwavering belief that both boys and girls deserved equal educational opportunities made her a respected figure in the community, even among those who initially found her ideas unconventional. Martha remained a vital part of their family, her wisdom and love a constant presence in the children's lives until her peaceful passing in the winter of 1890. She died as she had lived surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that the legacy she left behind would continue to thrive. Her loss was deeply felt by all, but especially by Dawson, who had been not just her son but her partner in building their life in Montana from the earliest days. "She was so proud of what you've accomplished," Temperance told him as they stood together after the funeral, watching their children place wildflowers on Martha's grave despite the snow that blanketed the small family cemetery on the ranch. "Of the man you became, the family you created, the success you've built," Dawson nodded, grief etched in the lines that now accompanied his smile. "She was my rock for so long. It's hard to imagine going forward without her." "You won't be without her," Temperance said softly. "She'll be with us in every lesson we teach our children, in every tradition we maintain, in every story we tell about her. Martha O'Malley isn't gone, she's just changed forms." As the years continued to pass, the O'Malley children grew into young adults who made their parents proud in different ways. Thomas, with his father's quiet strength and his mother's intellectual curiosity, attended university in Denver before returning to help run the family ranch with innovative techniques he had learned. Maggie, spirited and independent, became a teacher like her mother, but with ambitions that extended beyond the classroom. She was among the first women in Montana Territory to openly advocate for women's suffrage. Samuel, the youngest, combined his father's business acumen with an artistic temperament that was uniquely his own, eventually opening Helena's first photography studio. Through it all, Dawson and Temperance's love remained the family's foundation. Though time changed their bodies, adding silver to their hair and lines to their faces, it only deepened the connection between them. They weathered life's inevitable hardships together. Drought years that threatened the ranch, Temperance's bout with pneumonia that nearly took her from them when she was 45, the economic downturn that forced them to scale back operations temporarily in the mid-1890s. By the turn of the century, with Montana now a state and Helena its capital, the O'Malleys had become one of the area's most respected families. Their ranch had expanded, their children were establishing their own families, and Dawson and Temperance found themselves entering a new phase of life as grandparents. "Did you ever think we'd be here?" Temperance asked Dawson one evening in the spring of 1900, as they sat on the same porch where they had watched their own children play decades earlier. Now, it was Thomas's twin sons who chased fireflies in the gathering dusk, while his wife sat nearby with their infant daughter. "Honestly, no," Dawson admitted with a chuckle. When I saw you in that river, half drowned and desperate, all I thought was that I needed to save you. I never imagined you'd end up saving me right back. Saving you." Temperance raised an eyebrow, the gesture reminiscent of the young schoolteacher she had once been, though she was now in her mid-40s. "How do you figure that?" Dawson took her hand, the gesture as natural after 22 years of marriage as breathing. "Before you, I was just existing, running the ranch, taking care of Ma, going through the motions of living without really being alive. You brought purpose, passion, meaning." He gazed out at their expanding family, his expression soft with contentment. "You gave me all this. A legacy that will outlive us both." Temperance leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the familiar contours of the man who had been her partner through life's joys and sorrows. "The river gave us both a second chance," she murmured. "Who would have thought that nearly drowning would be the best thing that ever happened to me?" As twilight deepened into night, and the family gathered inside for dinner, a noisy, joyful affair with 3 generations around the table, Temperance looked around at the faces she loved most in the world. From Thomas with his wife and 3 children, to Maggie with her husband and young son, to Samuel, who had just announced his engagement to a lovely young woman from Bozeman. Each represented a branch of the family tree that had its roots in that fateful day when floodwaters had swept away everything she owned, and a cowboy named Dawson O'Malley had pulled her from the waters and given her hope. That hope had blossomed into a love story that spanned decades, a family that continued to grow, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The Missouri River, which had once threatened to take everything from Temperance, had instead given her everything that truly mattered. And as she met Dawson's gaze across the table, the love between them as strong and steady as the day they wed, she knew that some treasures could never be swept away, not by floods, not by hardship, not even by time itself. In the autumn of 1915, as the world beyond Montana found itself embroiled in the Great War in Europe, Temperance and Dawson celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. Now in their 60s, they had transitioned the day-to-day operations of the ranch to Thomas and his sons, though Dawson still insisted on riding out to check the cattle most mornings, despite the arthritis that increasingly plagued his hands and back. "Some habits are too ingrained to break," he told Temperance when she suggested he might stay closer to home on particularly cold mornings. "Besides, the day I can't sit a horse is the day they can put me in the ground." Temperance merely shook her head at such declarations, knowing better than to argue with the stubborn streak that had served her husband well through decades of ranching in Montana's unforgiving climate. Besides, she understood his need to remain useful, to maintain connection with the land and lifestyle that had defined him for so long. She felt the same about her own work with the Education Committee, though she had retired from classroom teaching years earlier. Their children had given them 8 grandchildren in total: Thomas's twins and daughter, Maggie's 2 sons and daughter, and Samuel's 2 daughters. The oldest grandchild, Thomas's son James, was now 20 and talking of enlisting if America entered the war in Europe, a prospect that filled Temperance with dread even as she understood his desire to serve. "History is unfolding before our eyes," she remarked to Dawson as they read newspaper accounts of the conflict overseas. "When I was teaching, I told the children that they were living through historic times as Montana became a state. Now our grandchildren are witnessing a war unlike any the world has ever seen. Let's pray they witness it from afar," Dawson replied grimly, thinking of young James and his twin brother William, both of whom possessed the O'Malley determination in abundance. Life had not been without its sorrows. They had buried Martha years ago, and more recently, Temperance's dear friend Elizabeth Sullivan, who had employed her at the boarding house all those years ago. They had weathered the loss of their first grandchild, Maggie's infant daughter who had lived only 3 days. They had supported Samuel through the grief of losing his wife to influenza just 2 years into their marriage, before they had children of their own, and had welcomed his second wife, Catherine, with open hearts when he found love again 5 years later. Through it all, their partnership had remained unshakable, a beacon of stability not just for their family, but for the entire community. Their story had become something of a local legend. The school teacher who lost everything in a flood, rescued by the cowboy who would become her husband. Younger generations in Helena sometimes ask them to recount the tale, marveling at how a near tragedy had transformed into the foundation of one of the area's most enduring families. It doesn't seem possible that it's been nearly 40 years, Temperance mused as they sat by the fire one evening, a quilt across their laps to ward off the autumn chill. Sometimes I can still feel the current pulling at me, still see your face as you reach down from that horse. Dawson smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with the gesture. His hair had long since turned from dark brown to silver, but his blue eyes remained as clear and perceptive as ever. Some memories never fade, do they? I remember thinking you were the most determined woman I'd ever seen, half drowned but still fighting. I was scared out of my wits, Temperance admitted with a laugh, but too stubborn to die. Thank God for that stubbornness, Dawson said, reaching for her hand. It served us well over the years. As winter settled over Montana once more, bringing with it the familiar rhythm of shortened days and long evenings by the fire, Temperance found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. From the educated but sheltered daughter of Boston parents who had sought adventure in the West, to the young woman who had lost everything in a moment of nature's fury, to the wife, mother, grandmother, and respected community member she had become, each chapter had shaped her in ways she could never have predicted. The little cabin Dawson had rebuilt for her after the flood still stood on their property, though it had been expanded and improved over the years. They had used it as their main residence until the children came along, then as guest quarters for visiting friends and relatives. Now it served as a retreat of sorts, a place where Dawson and Temperance could occasionally escape the busyness of the main ranch house and remind themselves of their beginnings. It was in this cabin, on a crisp December evening with snow falling gently outside, that they celebrated Dawson's 68th birthday with just the two of them, a rare occurrence given their large extended family. Temperance had prepared his favorite meal and a special cake, and afterward they sat before the fire much as they had done on countless evenings throughout their marriage. "I have something for you," Temperance said, retrieving a carefully wrapped package from a cabinet. "I've been working on it for months." Dawson unwrapped the gift to reveal a handsome leather-bound book. Opening it, he discovered pages filled with Temperance's elegant handwriting interspersed with photographs, pressed flowers, and other mementos. "Our story," she explained as he turned the pages with reverent fingers. "From the flood through last year's family reunion. I wanted our grandchildren and their children to know how it all began, how one act of courage changed both our lives forever." Dawson was silent for a long moment, his eyes suspiciously bright as he examined the detailed chronicle of their shared life. Finally, he looked up, his expression tender. "This is the most precious gift anyone has ever given me," he said softly. "Though it pales in comparison to the gift you gave me when you said yes all those years ago." "I think we gave that gift to each other," Temperance replied, moving to sit beside him on the small sofa. "And we keep giving it, every day we choose each other, every challenge we face together, every joy we share." Dawson set the book carefully aside and drew her into his arms, his embrace still strong despite the passing years. "I'd do it all again in a heartbeat," he murmured against her silver-streaked hair. "Every moment from pulling you from that river to right now." "Even the difficult parts?" Temperance asked, thinking of the droughts and blizzards, the losses and setbacks they had endured. "Especially those," Dawson affirmed. "They're what made us who we are, what made this life we've built together so meaningful." As the fire burned low and snow continued to fall outside the cabin windows, Temperance O'Malley rested in her husband's arms, surrounded by the tangible evidence of a life well lived. From the devastating flood that had threatened to end her life had come the greatest love story she could have imagined, a love that had not only endured but deepened with each passing year. The river had indeed swept away everything she owned that fateful day in 1878. But the cowboy who had pulled her from the waters had given her far more than just hope. He had given her a lifetime of love, a family that would continue for generations, and the unshakable knowledge that sometimes losing everything is just the beginning of finding what truly matters.